A new commandment I give unto you. And that is that ye love one another as I have loved you. That ye also love one another. By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another. A new commandment. From this text, what I think we must come to conclude is this: that in order for folk to really see whether we are followers or disciples of Jesus, it's more than us having the right name. And that is, as we find in the Bible, at least one name as a collective group that the church was known as is the Church of Christ. That's fine, that's great. But also what we recognize is that it is also important for us to teach the right doctrine. That's important. It's important for us to have the right organization of the church. The government of the church ought to be according to the Bible. It ought to also be right in regard to how we worship. We ought to worship God, as the Bible says, in spirit and in truth. All of these are important. But if we are going to have the world look at us as the church, we must recognize that it's more than those things that we have just mentioned. But as Jesus says, it's going to take the love that he had expressed and shown to all his disciples that now must be imitated in their lives to cause folk to really recognize that we are who we profess to be, and that is children of God. Now, what I think is interesting that we must recognize that this text here at verse 34 and 35 in John 13 is at the heel. It's at the back of something that has occurred earlier that we need to get some sort of understanding about, where we can better appreciate verse number 34 and 35 that we are studying. Notice what the Bible says. Let's check the book. In John 13, around verse 31 is where I'm going to start now. But even earlier, what I want you to recognize, that Jesus is now at what we call the Last Supper with his disciples. And at that supper, the Bible says that he raised the point that someone that was at the supper, one of us very own, was going to deny him, was going to betray him. That person was Judas Iscariot. And so the Bible says that when he made that known that someone today is going to betray him, the question went out among the other disciples is it I? Is it I? Is it I? And the Bible says that Simon Peter asked John, because John is laying in Jesus' bosom. And that's how they would do around the table. They would be where their legs were down like this, and they would be resting one toward another. And we find John is the one that has his head in Jesus' bosom. And so Jesus responds. At least we are aware to John. It's not clear whether everybody else do, but Jesus says that to John at least, that the man who dips in that sups with him, or right after him in this basin, will be the man that betrays him. And so the Apostle John is aware of this. And no doubt his question in mind perhaps would have been, now, this is the man that's holding the bag, the treasure, but this is the man that Jesus says is going to betray him. But around verse 31, where I want to share with you now, listen to what the Bible says to us. Let's check the book. At verse 31, the Bible says, therefore, when he was going out, that is, when Judas had now left the premises and left Jesus with the other 11, the Bible says this, that Jesus says, now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God be glorified in him, God shall also glorify him in himself, and shall straightway glorify him. Little children, watch this, yet a little while I am with you. Ye shall seek me, and as I said unto the Jews, whither I go, ye cannot come. So now I say to you. And so before he makes mention of verse 34, where he says the new commandment, he says, the Bible says, once Judas left the premises, the Lord says, now I'm going to be glorified. And the thought here is that Judas leaving was almost like the last element to sure enough certify that Jesus would be arrested. And therefore, being arrested, he would be taken eventually to the cross and die there. And in his death, he would, without question, glorify God. Now, the word glorify has reference to a shining, a brightness, that God would be made known without question, to be a shining, to be bright, to be awesome, because sure enough, he's worthy. And how he was proven to be even worthy, that Jesus himself was obedient even to the death, because it was all about God.